December 16th, 1944, 05:30 a.m., northern Ardennes. The dark is a living thing, wet, heavy, crowded with breath. The first mutter of guns comes low through the firs, a long roll under the snow, and then a closer thump that kicks powder from the branches. A sentry wipes frost from his eyelashes and thinks the forest is breathing. Down the slope, engines cough to life beneath tarps. Somewhere to the east, a truck door slams soft, like a book closing in a library. And then a line of telephone wire hums, and a voice on the net says, "We're hearing movement, many boots, many engines, all along the tree line. The fog sits on the ridges like wet wool. The sky is a lid, no aircraft, no sun. The roads are narrow scars through the timber, clawed by tank treads and sleet. On the maps last night, the front looked like a pencil line you could rub out. Now, before dawn, the pencil line is smudging on its own. A forward observer, hunched in a foxhole roofed with frozen saplings, lifts binoculars and sees nothing but the black on black of spruce trunks. He hears it, though, the cadence of a column threading the trees, the discipline of men keeping time in the dark. He taps the handset twice, then 3 times, code for standby. Through his gloves, he can feel the handset buzzing with distant talk. Batteries waking, breech blocks greased, is someone laughing too loudly and then going quiet. Down in a cut beside a frozen field, a gun crew pulls a tarp from a stack of ammunition crates. The stenciling is splotched with white paint and winter grime. The chief of section flicks his wrist lamp for a heartbeat, just enough to see the chalk mark on one crate. A small star. A private signal passed along a week ago by a courier who didn't smile and didn't linger. "These aren't the usual noses, boys," he'd said, and then he was gone up the road. The crew had joked about it, magic bullets, Santa's shells, but the chief didn't laugh. He just said, carefully, "Don't drop them. Don't leave one behind." At the ridge outpost, the observer catches a whiff of cold oil and pine. He draws circles in the frost on his sleeve and closes one eye. In his mind, the hill is a clean diagram, every trunk a ruler line, every fold of earth a thumb pressed into clay. If the Germans want the road, they have to come through this notch, and if they come through this notch, they have to push past that wall of trees, and if they push past that wall of trees, they have to show themselves on the little shoulder shaped like a dog's ear. He can't see the shoulder, but he knows where it is. He can feel it like a tooth with a filling. The first shells of the enemy preparation arrive slow and then not slow at all. Plops and then snaps, a ripple down the slope, the sound of snow thrown in a pan. The observers keep their heads tucked. The wire stays alive. The company runner crouches behind a birch and whispers to nobody. They picked a hell of a morning. A mile back, in a pasture that once carried hay, an American battery lays trails. The guns are cold to the touch and smell of solvent and metal. The men move with the precision of a habit they've paid for. Anybody who has hauled a shell through mud in October can do it on ice in December. The first rounds go to the usual racks, impact fuses, graze settings, the workhorses, but the chief looks at the star-marked crate again and clears his throat. He doesn't open it, not yet. The radio net hisses with the voice of a battalion fire direction center. The mapboard's plastic overlay squeaks under a greased pencil. Everywhere the same words, hold, hold, hold. The road junctions are names, and the names are prayers. Rocherath, Krinkelt, Bulge, Losheimer Graben, places that sound like teeth. The divisions have been thin for weeks, posted in quiet sectors built for rest. Tonight, the quiet sector is all splinters and steam. The observer hears the first German voices now. They are close enough to sound human instead of like a record played in another room. He can make out a whisper of numbers, a soft clank of metal, the scraped breath of someone lifting something heavy. A flare pops somewhere off to his left, swallowed quickly by fog. He speaks into the handset, calm and flat, and gives a grid. The batteries answer with the unearthly steadiness of men who have practiced. One gun misfires. The second gun speaks for it. The third puts a heavy note into the score. Then he hears something else. Not the incoming, not the usual slap of an impact in wet earth. A kind of slicing sound above, like a zipper pulled across the sky. A flash blooms, not at the ground but among the branches. It turns the black needles silver for a blink, and then the forest rains iron. The fragments hiss into snow with sounds like snakes. The observer feels a fine grit patter the back of his neck under the rim of his helmet. He smells the hot metal through the cold. One of the Germans shouts a word that is half a curse and half a plea. Another shout answers too high, the pitch of someone who didn't get low in time. Down the slope, a U.S. platoon feels the air ripple. Men suck into their coats, into the earth, into the shadows of roots and stones. They have dug scrapes, because who has time for a palace when the dawn is coming? Those scrapes are nothing now. The air itself is the enemy. Shallow does not help. The bursts are overhead, parasols of orange peeling in the fog, and the world is 1,000 needles coming down. Branches pop like broomsticks. A helmet rings like a bell and then keeps ringing in the skull beneath it. Someone laughs by mistake. Someone else is praying with his teeth closed. The observer, heart thudding against a wool shirt gone damp, keeps speaking. Adjust left, add 50, repeat. He has never heard the forest make this sound. It is not the thud and shower of earth thrown up by an impact. It is a ceiling cracking, a roof going to glitter and noise, the sky itself pulling down claws. In the cut behind the field, the battery crews hear their own bursts as a dull roll blown back on the fog, and they know, by that roll and by the way the fragments chew at the tree line, that something different is in the air. For a breath, the forest goes quiet, as if even the wind has to decide whether to move. And in that breath, you can feel what the men feel, American and German both, that the trees are no longer shelter. The trunks have become pillars in a temple that explodes from its rafters. The dirt is a mattress that does not cover your face. The low scrape that would have saved you yesterday is a shallow grave today. The fear crawls under the collar, not of the shell you see, but of the one you do not see until it opens a flower above you and drops its petals of metal into your back, your hands, the soft space behind the knee. There is no air cover. There will not be any until this lid lifts. The roads are jammed. The snow eats sound and then throws it back in pieces. In this hour, in this place, the guns are the whole backbone, and they're burning hot in the cold. You can smell the powder on the battery line, even through the numb at the end of your nose. The chief finally breaks the seal on the star-marked crate. Inside, the noses are different, sleeker, a little wrong to the eye, as if somebody took a familiar face and changed the angle of the jaw. A private reaches for one with gloves that aren't as dry as they should be, and the chief slaps his wrist without looking up. He nods at the stack, then at the horizon where the forest keeps coughing light. A young sergeant on the ridge thinks of home without meaning to. He thinks of a porch light left on in case he was late, of a kettle he can't hear, of a dog that will not understand why the front door opens and nobody walks in. He digs his elbows in deeper and sights past a splintered branch that used to be a whole tree. He whispers to the observer without moving his mouth, you hearing that? And the observer says, I am hearing all of it. The Germans try to rush the notch. You can hear the order become motion, the motion become noise, the noise become fear when the bursts come again, brighter now, closer to where the branches meet the gray. Men drop in place, and the line of them ripples like a sheet laid over a bed, the corners kicked and then smoothed by instinct. Somebody blows a whistle that is supposed to say forward and instead says, hold, hold, hold. The first minute of a surprise is always the shortest. It changes the longest day. Somewhere far back, a colonel leans over a map lit by a hooded lamp and listens to the reports. A pencil tapping a beat he doesn't feel. The fog is still down. The phones still hum. The forest takes a breath, and the guns give it a voice. There is a long, fragile silence in the battery. The chief takes it and snaps it in half with 4 words. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. Every man is already leaning toward the breach. Load the new fuses. Fire for effect. Dawn curls late over the trees on December 17th, just after 06 Abai, but the light feels counterfeit, thin, pewter, a day that doesn't want to be born. Frost smokes off the gun barrels where hands have held them too long. At the battery line, men breathe into their sleeves and button their collars one more button, as if a tighter collar could make you safer from the sky. The chief lays one of the new noses in a gloved palm. It looks like a secret learned in a hurry. The handler slides it onto the shell's threaded neck and feels the threads catch, the way a door finds the right hinge in the dark. No speeches, just the click of a ratchet, the kiss of metal seating metal, and that small nod men give each other when the thing that matters is simple and exact. On the net, A forward observer whispers from a pine-shadowed knuckle above a logging track. He doesn't have sight, he has sound and a clock. Footfalls in snow carry a rhythm when men move in file. You count the beats, mark the pause, feel the pause stretch as they stop to listen, and you live inside their listening without ever seeing their faces. He calls a grid and says, "Stand by, battery, battery, stand by." A corporal checks the watch he keeps in his breast pocket, a watch that's been wrong for months and right when it counts. The Fire Direction Center reads numbers in a calm you only find on either side of panic. The word rides the wire, time on target. The guns are spread across pastures and hedgerow cuts, some in the shadows of barns, some against low stone walls braided with ice. The crews lean over protractors and tapes. They set fuses at the table by the lantern, where coffee goes cold in minutes. They synchronize to the second, to the breath, to the gut feeling you get when a whole field of steel is about to speak the same word at the same instant. The observer licks a cracked lip and stares into a wall of fir trunks that give him nothing. He can smell the Germans before he can see them, the leather, the breath through wool, the smoke they swore they'd quit. He says 2 more digits into the handset, a gentler correction than a man might use to move a painting straight on a wall. Then his voice goes low. Execute, time on target. Miles back, lanyards snap and shoulders rock with the recoil. The first gun bucks, the second, the third. A choir with no faces. The shells lift into a sky that can't be seen. And for a few seconds, the world is quieter than it should be. A held inhale, a shared waiting. And then the forest learns a new note. It doesn't come from the ground. It blooms just under the canopy, a string of white-orange suns popping across the treetops in an almost simultaneous sweep. A sky rip, the kind that seems to unzip the morning. The bursts throw light down, and the light throws knives. Fragments whistle into the crusted powder, with a sound like angry sewing. Branches scythe away and fall in sheets. The men below, whose lives depend on shallow scrapes and the shadow of bark, feel the air turn into teeth. Under that rippling roof, a German squad leader crouches to shout and realizes his voice belongs to yesterday. The cover that used to be roof is now a lantern, and he can't put it out. He drags a man by the belt into an old shell scrape and feels the scrape cannot hold the sky. The seconds he needs to gather his squads evaporate into the hiss of fragments and the patter of wood spalls. He lifts his head to count the rhythm between bursts, and the next rhythm arrives too soon. The plan they rehearsed is a map drawn on water. Back on the line of guns, a private wipes his nose with the back of his wrist and grins without meaning to. He doesn't know the circuitry, only the promise that the fuse knows when the world is close. He imagines the tip listening as it falls, measuring distance in a language of echoes, deciding in a sliver of sky that now is the place, here is the height. This is where the steel becomes weather. At the observer's post, splinters tick against his helmet, a delicate sound against the heavy one. He can't see the men he's killing. He can see the way the trees shake, the way the snow dusts down like sifted flour after each blossom of light. He calls repeat and hears the word repeat itself in 4 directions. He feels the counterpressure that only comes when multiple batteries throw their weight onto one small piece of earth and agree that it must not be taken. Secrecy rides shotgun on every crate. Do not leave duds. Do not let one lie where it can be found. If a shell falls blind, you send men to make sure the secret does not become theirs. The crews speak of it in the spaces between commands, the way you speak about a weapon that is both a tool and a rumor. They have been warned that if the fog lifts too much, if patrols go too far, they may have to choose between recovering a body and recovering a nose. Nobody says which choice is right. They all know which one they'll make. In the pause between salvos, the observer hears a sudden hollowness and realizes what's missing, the old confidence that hugging the ground is life. This morning, the ground is a suggestion. Safety is deeper than a man could dig when the clock struck 5. Deep dugouts and real timbered roofs still shrug off the knives from above, but the shallow and the hurried, the expedient and the brave, are all the same under a burst that opens like a manhole into daylight. The tot finishes its sentence. The echo hangs a little, as echoes do when there's snow to hold them. The attacker's timing frays. One company is early and finds no neighbor on its flank. Another is late and finds only holes where men were supposed to be. Messages tramp back along white tracks trampled to slush. The handlers recrate what they can't spend and move the star-marked boxes deeper into shadow. The chief whistles a tune he doesn't know he knows, the kind you pick up in a mess hall and forget until the moment you need to keep your hands from shaking. Near noon, the fog thins just enough for distance to have color. The observer dares a periscope peek and sees dark figures against pale drift, the shapes of men trying to make small bodies even smaller. He sees them pause at the edge of a grove, feel the grove is wrong, and try the open ground instead. And he knows then the morning has changed something more than angles. The canopy is a rumor. The rumor is a trap. He calls for one more mission to break an assembly he can't see but feels, an absence of sound where there should be marching. The guns oblige like old friends who don't ask why. Another veil of light snaps across the treetops, and the hiss and patter play their cruel music again. Somewhere a whistle blows with the authority of training and gets answered by silence. Somewhere else, a man throws himself into a snowbank and finds it thinner than he hoped. By late afternoon, when the day is already slipping toward night, the battery crews unlace their boots just enough to let blood back into numb toes. They don't talk about miracles. They talk about timings that worked and rounds that did not lie. They talk about how the bursts felt closer, how the forest seemed to shake from above instead of from the earth. They talk about orders that sounded like a door opening. Use them now. On the ridge, the observer places his palm flat against the frozen log above his foxhole and feels the tiny tremor that rides through wood when air bursts in a line. He closes his eyes and sees the map he's been drawing in his head redraw itself. Fields of fire taller than men. Danger zones that are roofs instead of floors. A sky that cannot be trusted. He opens them when the handset clicks twice, then 3 times. The code for standby, and a new voice edges into the net from a battered crossroads to the south with a name that tastes of snow. We're holding, the voice says, but they're forming again in the trees, requesting immediate fire. Same grid, same song. Midday, December 17th. The snow on Elsenborn Ridge is crusted into glitter and glass. The wind combs the firs and shakes down a slow dust that looks like flour sifted from a baker's hand. Up here, the ground tilts toward the German approach corridors like a shield held at just the right angle, and the American guns below that shield are ready to bite. The 99th and the 2nd sit thin along the timber, faces chapped, eyes reddened to thread. You can taste the resin in the air when a shell tears a limb free and the sap steams sweet for a heartbeat before the cold owns it again. The forward observers have learned the morning's lesson. They talk in modest numbers and exactives, shaving corrections like a barber leaning close, moving rounds by notches that would look like nothing on a wall but mean life on a ridge. A lieutenant kneels behind a moss stump, half his world a circle of glass and half a shiver he cannot stop. He calls for 1-5s to wash the near tree line, and for 1-50s to bruise the ground where the trees open to a shoulder. The first anti-armor shadows he expected don't show. It's boots first, rifles first, the old way. Men in the woods trusting bark and snow to break the wind and spare the skin. It doesn't spare anything. The first airbursts crack the canopy on the slope below, and the sound travels up the ridge like distant applause that suddenly turns and rushes your face. The light flares among the needles, and a sheet of metal rain hisses downward. You can see the German line all at once then, not because it stands and runs, but because it flattens and ripples and leaves dark commas in the white where bodies press the snow. A sergeant with a scar like a pencil line down his cheek shouts for his squads to push right along a deer track he found at dawn. The track looks good, shadowed, narrow, nearly invisible from above. He makes 10 steps and a burst opens 5 trees ahead and 3 trees up, and the track becomes a throat. He throws his men off it and into the scrub, and the scrub spits splinters into their wrists. On the battery line west of the ridge, a gun crew rides its own rhythm. The 105 barks and recoils. Shell casings clang and roll like bells with no clappers. The section chief keeps the fuses coming, wrist deep in the star-marked crate, eyes steady. When the fire direction center speaks repeat, the word moves through the crew as if it were a lever pulled at the same time in every chest. The 155's farther back answer with heavier punctuation, the big commas that make a man's thoughts stop and restart a half-inch to the left. The twin villages, Krinkelt and Rocherath, sit a few miles off like 2 pockets stitched into the same coat. Snow lies heavy on the roofs. Windows breathe fog and then freeze their own breath in lace. The streets are choked with drifts and with things that never belong to streets. A broken track, a door torn from a barn, a wheel that doesn't match any wagon left standing. U.S. infantry crouch inside doorways scabbed with ice, toes numb, and fingers doing work too fine for gloves. They have a radio on a chair and a runner at the threshold and a map on a table whose oilcloth corners are held down by a coffee mug and a box of matches. From the eastern tree lines, German elements feel their way toward the houses. Close-range fights here are measured in shutters and hedgerow gaps, in the way a street dog will pause to listen before it crosses. The Americans have hung their defense on hips and elbows, bodies plugging lanes while the artillery draws lines the eye can't see. When the forward observers seed a grid into the net, the bursts arrive not at the curb, but in the dark fringe where trunks mass and men believe the street edge saves them. A ripple of airbursts sweeps just above the first rank of branches. The splinters flicker in and out of the drifting light. The hedgerow that was cover becomes a brush that combs metal into the face. A corporal, watching a lane from a half-collapsed window, looks up when the first treetop firework goes off behind the houses. The glass in the frame rings a high note and then tinkles to frost. He drags his sleeve across his mouth and finds it tastes like pennies. Out in the orchards, a pair of German scouts who had spent an hour learning the rhythm of a sentry's cough suddenly can't hear anything but the patter, and the sentry can't hear his own cough, and the orchard stops being an orchard and becomes an illustration in a field manual nobody has written yet. At the map table in a schoolhouse that hasn't taught anyone since November, grease pencil lines thicken around Elsenborn. A captain taps the eraser of his pencil on the ridgeline and says nothing. The division artillery officer leans over his shoulder and draws a neat box around a shoulder of ground, whose name they both know but don't say, because saying it makes it sound like something that can be taken. He drinks coffee that is half grounds and cold enough to bite back. He listens as the observers call for fire, and as the fire answers like a tide. Evening, December 18th. A sky the color of lead sagging toward roofs that feel too low. The village streets are purple with dusk and the churn of boots. A bulldozer that has no business in a war noses a wreck out of an intersection, while a mortar crew counts under their breath. The German push tightens, testing a line of houses that might hold if a breeze doesn't decide otherwise. From the tree line, a machine gun rakes the street and folds two men into the snow almost gently. The forward observer in the schoolhouse attic, cheeks salted with powder dust, inches the sight a window width and breathes one word into the wire: now. The tot unwraps itself above the village skirts like a string of lanterns lit in a storm. Bursts ladder up and then across, a roof of light that seems to lean over the streets and blow out the edges. You can hear the difference. Impact punches the ground and sends anger outward. Airburst throws it down like a trap door dropping. In that downpour, the German squad that had timed their dash to the beat of the earlier missions loses its metronome. A man with a grenade in his fist flinches at the stinging hail on his neck and forgets to throw. Another man flings himself through a garden fence and comes up with a glove full of splinters and a mouthful of steam. The Americans don't cheer. They refill belts and change barrels and shout across doorways and shove a stretcher through a hall that used to echo with spelling lists. A chaplain steps into a vestibule to see if there is anything in it that can be called quiet, and the vestibule shakes overhead and drops dust that smells like chalk and cordite, the incense of this new liturgy. A German perspective threads the tree line. A squad leader who spent 2 winters on another front, who learned how to count the spaces between enemy shells and to shelter men in the roots of trees, finds his clock has lost its hands. He stares up at the canopy and feels small as a boy in a church where the ceiling has opened to a storm. He is brave. He is as brave as anyone, but bravery needs a rule of thumb and a shelter that holds long enough to apply it. He drags 2 men into an old foxhole and can feel the hole is a bowl for catching knives. He signals retreat with a curl of his hand and knows the word will take longer to travel than the next burst will. By midnight, the ridgelines are a story told with the same few words: hold, shift, mass, repeat. The artillery battalion staff stand around the map like men standing around a stove, hands out. Faces lit from below by a ghost of heat. Grease pencil arcs glisten where the light finds them. Coffee rings dry into moons by the sector boundary. Somebody tucks a star-marked slip under the edge of the map with a thumb, as if it were a playing card they don't want to show. The decision is simple in its telling and hard in its weight. More guns to the ridge, more weight to the places where the trees throw shadows the enemy still trusts. When the order goes, trucks grind and splash, chains rattle, and the road to Elsenborn becomes a moving root system. Batteries repositioning like blood pushed to a wound. The men on the ridge hear it more than see it. The healthy sound of mass gathering. The observers sleep in slices and dream of white ceilings cracking into light. The crews pull tarps tighter over the star-marked crates and feel the air grow even colder when the tarps are lifted, as if the secret inside generates its own weather. The day closes on a village crossroad where a signpost points to places the men can't pronounce. The signpost vibrates when the bursts run along the tree line and shivers when the heavy guns speak from the pasture. A runner skids in the snow, catches himself on the post, and laughs once because he does not fall. He pushes through the schoolhouse door and says the line that has come to sound like an answer and a question in the same breath. They're massing again in the trees. We're ready if you are. In the paused breath before Part 4 begins, the map's grease pencil box around Bastogne grows a little darker, as if someone leaned their weight there without meaning to. The ring in the snow is tightening. The night is full of boots and whispers. The sky above the trunks remembers how to bloom. Night folds tight around the Bastogne woods on December 19th, and the cold hardens until breath turns to glass. The perimeter is a chalk circle drawn in snow, foxholes rimed with ice, men moving like shadows inside a lantern. The town behind them breathes steam through shattered windows. The roads into it are strings pulled taut, and every tug from the dark can be felt in the ribs. Just after 22 Bastogne, the first probes begin. Soft feet, muffled chains, a whisper of metal against bark. An outpost hears a click that isn't ice and keys the handset twice, then 3 times. The forward observer on the nearest knoll kneels into a low roof made of frozen saplings, the kind that creaks when you exhale. He can't see faces. He doesn't need to. The sound is enough. Men pacing off yards in the timber, a squad leader's breath caught at the end of a word, the hush that falls when a hand goes up. He gives a grid to the batteries that have tied themselves like muscles around the town, the light guns in tight belts, the heavier ones farther out, the ones that answer with a slower, deeper voice. He shaves the numbers 2 digits to the left, the way you nudge a picture frame until it sits level. He says, "Stand by." And then he says a single word that every man around the ring has been waiting for since sundown. Now. The bursts open not on the ground, but in the trees, a string of lanterns torn loose and lit at once. White-orange spreads across the black fir tops, and the light falls with knives tucked into it. The snow answers with a hiss, like a crowd sucking air. The probe that had used the trunks for a wall suddenly finds the wall exploding into splinters. A man in a white smock throws himself flat and feels the air bite at his calf where the cloth doesn't reach. Another dives for an old stump and learns in an instant what shallow means when the ceiling is the enemy. In a farmhouse used as a fire direction center, a pencil moves clean across plastic overlay, loops around a patch of dark, and stops. The lieutenant's lips don't move when he speaks. The words go out of him like breath you can't see, and the guns, spread like spokes from the town, answer back with a clockwork that sounds like a heartbeat laid over the rumble of trucks. The chief of a light battery touches the star-marked crate with a gloved knuckle. For luck he claims not to believe in, and keeps the noses coming, one after another, the thread of metal finding metal in the dark. Near midnight, December 20th, fog drops thicker than cloth. Snowflakes drift and then fly sideways in gusts that turn the woods into a tunnel. The line out at a sunken lane hears someone counting under his breath. Not in English, not afraid, just counting, because numbers give shape to fear. The forward observer raises his periscope and sees only a smear of dark on darker. He whispers a grid and adds, "Up 50. The guns lift the roof of light. When the first ripple of airbursts slices across the lane, the trench line hums with the little sounds men make when something bigger than them moves overhead and chooses where to fall. A German platoon leader who has followed a compass through a stand of fir so tight it stole his breath at noon now feels time go slack. He has taught his men to find the ground at the first whump and to count the beats between. Tonight the beats will not be counted. Tonight the canopy blooms and rains and blooms again, and the snow flashes as if a lake were catching lightning. He drags a man by the collar into a scrape someone else abandoned yesterday and feels the scrape hold nothing. He can taste sap. He can taste metal. He can taste the kind of panic that feels like breath you can't exhale. He signals a pullback with 2 fingers and a curl and watches the signal dissolve in the glare. On the southern arc, just before dawn, on December 21st, boots whisper through a stand of young pines. The outpost lets them pass the line of wire where tin cans hang from string and kiss in the wind. The forward observer hears the new noise, the absence of a bird that should have moved, the hush before a whispered jetst, and slides the crosshairs a hair's width. 2 digits right. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The word goes out, and the sky answers, and the pines comb the fragments downward. The attack melts without drama, not with a rout, but with the slow conviction of men discovering that the direction they chose no longer exists. Bastogne breathes with the batteries. Shells come in wrapped in blankets and leave hot to the touch. The crews work in mittens until the mittens are useless, and then with bare hands until the hands stop feeling the cold. And then again, with mittens because someone remembers the skin will matter tomorrow. The star-marked noses slide on and seat with that same patient kiss of metal to metal. A chaplain steps into a gun pit to hand a man a cup that long ago lost any heat and says nothing, because everyone knows the only prayer that counts tonight is a grid read true. By afternoon, the ring has a rhythm. Probes test, the FO listens, the bursts uncurl above trunks, the hiss follows, the ring tightens, the test stops. The men inside the circle begin to breathe on the exhale instead of the inhale. They check their watches and find the hours have names again. A runner laughs at nothing, and then at everything. A medic sits down hard in the snow and remembers he forgot to eat breakfast, and then realizes he didn't have breakfast to forget. Not everything yields. There are stretches where the enemy finds a cellar that holds, a dugout with real timbers, a bunker with a roof that shrugs off the metal rain. Armor pushes to a tree line and waits for something with teeth. The airbursts are teeth for men in the open, for men between places, for men trusting bark and shallow dirt. They are a roof turned into a trap. For the rest, the old answers still matter. Tank destroyers cursing at frozen traverses. Bazooka teams walking their courage down a ditch. Engineers laying charges where the road narrows enough for a mind to feel like a door you can close. Night again, December 21st. The town is a smudge of light and noise, and the smell of fuel bleeding from punched cans. Somewhere a piano with half its keys plays a hymn without a tune. On the northeast arc, the FO crouches behind a blown log and listens to men breathe across a narrow cut. He can tell by the hush that they're studying distance, chosen line, the space between a whisper and a shout. He tilts the glass, counts to 3, and murmurs the new grid. The guns write their answer across the canopy in a hand that is becoming familiar to everyone who lives under it. The probe breaks like a wave under a seawall and slides away, leaving footprints that fill with powder and vanish. The men on the line don't call it a miracle. They call it a break, a minute you wouldn't have had. They talk in the tight words of work, good mission, on time, more, again, and leave the rest for later. But you can feel it in their shoulders when they stand. The lift isn't as heavy. You can hear it in their jokes, which return without being funny. One man says the trees are angry, another says the trees are on our side. A third says the trees don't care. They just break where the light hits them. And then, on December 23rd, the day stops pretending to be night. The lid that has sat on the forest since the 16th loosens. The fog pulls apart like wet paper, and the sun, thin as it is, finally shows a direction. Engines in the air find the roads they were promised. The town looks up and sees silver and knows the shape without naming it. The ring in the snow holds, not because the sky is clearing now, but because it did not clear before, and the ring still held. In the woods just outside the perimeter, a squad that has been trying to learn the spaces between the bursts for 3 days stops in a clearing and decides to move only at the sound of their own hearts. The clearing answers them with a crack of light above, and they choose another plan. Somewhere a whistle blows and is respected because the roof is quiet for a minute. Somewhere else a whistle blows and is swallowed by the hiss and patter, and the sigh that follows when men decide not to keep going forward after all. By the time the streaks in the sky draw shadows across the snow at noon, the perimeter is not a promise. It is a fact. The batteries have burned through nights and fingers and fear. The ring is a circle written in fragments and ice, and men who refuse to count the seconds between old bursts when a new kind of burst demanded no counting at all. The town keeps breathing. The roads are still strings. The hands that held the strings all week have calluses where they didn't before. The observer on the knoll lowers his glass and lets the strap bite into his neck. He can hear the planes now, but he doesn't look up. He looks into the trees, into the places where the enemy learned the same lesson he did. That a roof can be a floor, that a forest can turn on you, that a circle in the snow can hold when the sky explodes in the branches. He clicks the handset twice, then 3 times, and waits for the answer he knows by heart. When it comes, it rides the line like a wire humming in winter, steady and warm against the cold. Ready? Your grid when you are. The lid begins to lift on December 23rd, and with it, the sound returns to the sky. Engines drawing lines above roads that had been only rumors for a week. The snow throws back a thin glare, and every shadow finds a direction again. But the shape of the battle in the woods does not forget what it learned in the dark. On Elsenborn Ridge, the guns are still arranged like a jaw, and the ridge still bites. Around Bastogne, the ring is a groove pressed into ice by men who would not step out of it. In the twin villages, the windows that can't hold glass hold men instead. And the tree lines beyond them have not forgiven anyone who trusted them. Through Christmas, the weather holds to its brittle clarity and then turns again. Patchwork days of sun and gray, snow that comes sideways, snow that falls straight. The counterpunch grows its muscles mile by mile. But ask the men who watched the first week through, and they will tell you the change already came when the bursts moved from the ground to the rafters. The lesson is not a slogan. It is the memory of a canopy that became a floor, of shallow cover that became a lie, of timing that cracked when the air itself started to cut. There were places it did not reach. The old proofs remained stubbornly true. Deep dugouts with honest timbers and doors, set right still, shrugged off the knives from above. Armor sitting patient under pine could wait for different teeth to come find it. Bunkers did the work they were built to do. The men who met those with rockets and fire and charges spoke a separate language of courage that had nothing to do with fuses and everything to do with walking forward when walking forward felt like a dare. But between the hard points, on approaches, in assembly, in the pauses men take to breathe before a rush, the roof bursts wrote a new rule. The secrecy that wrapped the star-marked crates never really loosens. It only changes its tone. Patrols walk farther now, and when they find duds, they make sure the lesson that changed the forest does not change hands. Gun crews who could name their shells by weight and smell and balance add a new word to their private dictionaries and do not say it out loud. Forward observers build the trick into their touch, the small correction that makes light open where trunks meet the gray, the way you nudge a picture on a wall until it hangs the way a room needs it to. A German officer, exhausted, intelligent, the kind of man who can make order out of bad news, writes a report that feels like a confession. Attacks met a roof of explosions, he writes in the language of duty. Assembly under trees no longer reliable, shallow entrenchments insufficient, adjustments required. It is a map of an idea crossing lines on paper and becoming a change in how men step across snow. The adjustments come because men who survive are quick learners. Wider intervals, different routes, movement by nibble and pause, more care with where a body chooses to become small. But the cost of learning has already been paid in the first week, paid in the space where a plan meets a new sound. On the American side, the doctrine begins to tilt, not like a revolution, but like a table leg shimmed under a stack of folded paper. Commanders who marked their maps with grease pencil moons now draw higher danger zones, ellipses that float over approaches, caution arrows that start at the crown of a tree line instead of the foot of it. The word assembly gets a new caution pinned beside it. The phrase time on target carries a taste of treetop light. A forward observer school somewhere far from the front will teach a class next year that remembers this winter and will show students how to aim for a roof they cannot see. December 27th comes cold and clear, and the woods hold a quieter violence, the kind that lives in memory more than in air. A gun line that has not slept a night through since the 16th stacks its last star-marked crate under a tarp that smells of canvas and oil. The men take off their gloves and flex their hands and discover the grooves the winter cut into their palms. They talk about home without looking at each other. One says he will build a roof twice as strong as his father's. Another says he will never walk under a spruce in silence the same way again. A mile forward, the forest after an airburst is a gallery of small aftermaths. The needles are singed to a brown that drinks light. The branches wear a lace of ice and soot. A helmet sits half buried in powder, as if it were planted and waiting for spring. The snow is pebbled with scars where fragments entered and slept. There is a smell like pennies and pine, faint now, the incense of a week when the sky learned to open in the trees. A medic kneels in a shallow scrape and presses his palm into the bottom of it. The scrape is a story of a man who did not dig far enough. He stands and looks up, and the canopy seems lower than it did, as if memory had bent it. On a ridge path, two men walk by, one American, one German, both very young and very old. The half-surrendered posture of men who have spent a week giving all their bones to winter. They nod without speaking because the woods have taught them the same lesson, even if they learned it from different maps. Each carries a shape of the other's fear now, and there is a respect in that, a quiet one. What changed is not the balance of a war in one stroke. What changed is the arithmetic of a forest when men move through it to kill and not be killed. The new fuse took a bet soldiers have made since the first man hid under the first ledge, that the world above will spare you if the world below is deep enough, and it made that bet pay different odds. The result is not a miracle or a myth. It is a handful of saved minutes at a ridge that mattered, a canceled rush at the edge of a street that would have folded otherwise, a ring in the snow that did not break before the sun came back. What endured is everything that always endures, discipline that doesn't need a witness, roads that must be held no matter who can see them from the sky, hands that shake after the work is done, and then learn to be steady again. The men will leave the Ardennes and carry the forest with them, as a sound they hear in quiet rooms, as a flinch they hide when a branch snaps in a park, as a tale they tell almost to themselves about a winter when the trees were not what they seemed. In the end, when the guns are cold and the map is folded, and the grease pencil moons are smudged into someone's sleeve, what remains is a human-sized truth. You hold a place by refusing to give it away in the minute when it is easiest to surrender. The rest, the cleverness of metal, the timing, the circuitry hidden under paint, is only the tool you pick up when the minute asks its question. The forest keeps its secrets. One of them had a radar heart. The content in this video is compiled from multiple sources. If anything needs correction or clarification, please leave a comment below. See you next time.